Great. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on such short notice. I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you for being here with us. And if you can drop in the chat where you're joining us from, that would be helpful. I'm Yasmine Taeb. I'm MPower Action's Legislative and Political Director, and want to just provide some background before opening up our discussion with our panelists. So as folks know, in the early hours of June 13th, as folks saw, Israel launch horrific and illegal strikes on Iran in the heart of its capital, Tehran, killing scores of civilians. Israel carried out targeted assassinations of top Iranian leaders, scientists, and a negotiator involved in diplomatic talks with the US. The Israeli bombing campaign has had a devastating human toll. They have struck homes and residential areas, art studios, fuel depots, Iranian state broadcaster, and social welfare centers. It's been very clear that Israeli officials have shown that this is not about Iran's nuclear program, and that to them, US diplomacy and a peaceful resolution with Iran is actually what they consider the threat, and why Israel has sabotaged the negotiations. During just kind of providing more context, during the Biden administration, Israel assassinated a top Iranian nuclear scientist prior to Biden even taking office, in attempts to delay talks and negotiations. Then Israel attacked the Natanz nuclear facility when the talks started again, sabotaging efforts in support of diplomacy. This follows their persistent efforts and lobbying by groups like AIPAC to sabotage Obama's Iran diplomacy efforts. And once again, as we're seeing, Israel has sabotaged negotiations that Trump was pursuing by also killing a negotiator directly involved in the talks. This is, in fact, a war of choice. And we need to make that clear. Israel's unilateral strikes were illegal and unconscionable, which is why it's so important that our elected leaders hear from our communities and the grassroots. The American people unequivocally do not support war with Iran. There's, like a slew, like a number of legislative vehicles that have been introduced, namely the Iran War Powers resolutions that all of our groups are working around the clock to build support for. And we'll discuss that during our conversation today as well, and how you can take action. Now, I want to open it up to discussion with our panelists. Just a quick introduction of our speakers. Omar Baddar is a political analyst, digital producer, and human rights activist based in DC. Ryan Costello currently serves as policy director at the National Iranian-American Council, where he directs NIAC's policy team in its efforts to influence policymakers and coordinates advocacy efforts. And Trita Parsi is the executive vice president of the Quincy Institute. He's an award-winning author and an expert on US-Iran relations, Iranian foreign policy, and the geopolitics of the Middle East. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today. I want to turn it to Trita for our first question. Trita, if you can give us an overview of how we got here, what were the prospects of negotiations with Iran prior to Israel's unilateral strike on Iran, and if you can provide kind of a quick explainer on the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that was entered into in 2015. We know it was working, and it was limiting Iran's nuclear program peacefully without having to bomb civilians, scientists, and negotiators. And we know that Israel right now is bombing civilian infrastructure, causing immense damage and loss of life. Furthermore, if you can, talk a little through and explain to our attendees, why did he tear up the Iran deal during his first term, despite strong objections from his own cabinet, right? His Secretary of Defense, his Secretary of State, his National Security Advisor, who all told him not to get out of the agreement because it's working. And finally, it's a lot of questions on you, Trita. And finally, a lot of our groups worked alongside Quincy during the Biden administration to really, advocate and push Biden to re-enter the Iran deal, which was not successful. If you can also provide some insight as to whether you believe Biden's actions contributed to where we are today.
Right, that's 3 hours right there, but I'll try to keep it quick. All right, let me start off with what I think is the most important thing. Why are we in the current situation right now? What is it that led the beginning of talks to end up in this situation? I think it's important to understand why that happened because it gives you a hint of how we get out of this situation. Talks were actually going quite well because Trump had been insisting during the campaign and in the beginning that his only red line is weaponization. Not zero enrichment or anything like that. And this created a basis in which the two sides actually could come to an agreement. They needed to sort out details, etc. Halfway through, he changes the goalpost and adopts the Israeli position of zero enrichment. The Israelis had been relentlessly pushing in on this. There were perhaps a couple of communications problems the administration had committed that made it easier for the Israelis to attack the administration for pursuing a reasonable approach. The Israelis pushed zero enrichment, knowing very well that it would lead to an impasse in the talks. And predictably, it did. As soon as it did, the Israelis went to the White House, recognizing that Trump was getting frustrated and saying, look, we can fix this. Give us a green or yellow light to go in militarily. We will soften the Iranian position. We will unlock this deadlock and things can move forward. Knowing very well that once they start a war, rather than actually seeing the Iranian position becoming softer, it would harden their position. And within 24 to 48 hours after starting the bombing, they went back to the White House telling Trump, you know that we said that we would take care of this. Actually, forget about that. Why don't you step in and finish the job? Had Trump never signed on to zero enrichment, we would not be in this situation right now. In fact, we would likely have reached a framework agreement by now if they had stuck to the original position. For this to get unlocked, there needs to be diplomacy, and there's a lot of challenges to that right now. If you look at what the Iranian position is, they say they're not going to talk directly to the US, or at least in a public way, because there's a lot of back channels going on as long as the Israelis are bombing. One can understand that position. The problem is that position gives the Israelis a veto as to whether the US or Iran are pursuing diplomacy or not. And that is actually a very unwise position, in my view, for the Iranians to take. But if they manage to find their way to the negotiating table, I think it is essential to make sure that the zero enrichment objective is discarded and a much more reasonable and workable position is adopted, which will guarantee that Iran does not get nuclear weapons, because you do not need to have zero enrichment to stop weaponization. And this is a good segue to the old deal. The old deal did not call for zero enrichment. The Iranians were enriching uranium at 3.67 at one facility, and with massive inspections, restrictions on how many centrifuges they could use, restrictions on how much low enriched uranium they would ever be able to possess or hold on their own territory. 300 kilos, you need 1,200 kilos to actually build a weapon. With constant inspections from the IAEA to make sure that there's never anything missing. A deal along those lines, but perhaps tougher, is still possible. And part of the reason I think the Trump administration could get a tougher deal is because they're willing to put more sanctions relief on the table. They're willing to lift sanctions that have prevented American companies from going into the Iranian market, which then is a good segue as to why Biden failed in all of this. Biden did not really try. He had an excellent envoy that was very adamant about getting a deal, but was given more or less impossible parameters by the Biden administration. And the root of it was that at the end of the day, Biden was not eager for a deal. He didn't want to pay the political cost for a deal. He didn't want to repeat what happened to Obama, in which he had to fight so hard and spend so much political capital on in defending that deal because of the opposition from the Israelis. And Biden's own envoy, Rob Malley, had pointed out in New York Times that Trump was eager for a deal, whereas Biden was at best lukewarm. And that tells you why that failed. And had Biden actually done something to restore Obama's legacy, whether it was in Iran or whether it was in Cuba, he could have done it. He could have easily done it, but essentially chose not to. And then that kicked the can down the road to the hands of Trump, who originally, again, went in there with the right approach, but then shifted as a result of pressure from the Israelis.
Thank you so much, Trita, for that overview and your incredibly helpful insights. So I'm going to turn it to Ryan. Ryan, the National Iranian-American Council recently commissioned YouGov to conduct a comprehensive poll of the Iranian-American community between May 10th and June 2nd of this year. Key findings of your poll noted that a majority of Iranian Americans surveyed oppose U.S. military action against Iran, with a strong majority of Iranian Americans supporting a new deal that guards against Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. Can you talk through about how Israel and Trump allies are spreading misinformation by claiming the war on Iran is something that is supported by Iranians and Iranian Americans, and what specifically the Iranian American community can do to push back on this messaging, especially since so many of us have family in Iran, including myself, and many of us, frankly, haven't even been able to communicate with our family at all and have no idea if they're safe.
Oh, thanks, Yasmine, and thanks for having me. I know it's such a difficult time for you and really all members of the Iranian American community right now, particularly those with loved ones on the ground who they can't hear from, or those who've had to flee Tehran, or are directly in the line of fire. It's a really scary time, and I think the earlier points, Netanyahu chose this war. There was an opportunity to resolve this through diplomacy, and we were supposed to have negotiations with the Iranians on Sunday. Netanyahu did not preempt a threat. He preempted the negotiations. And so it's extremely dangerous and troubling that Trump has allowed this, that he's allowed Bibi to choose war, and potentially for the United States. He seems to be tilting strongly in the direction of military intervention, which would be a betrayal of the American people. It would be a betrayal of his base. You talked about the polling that that NIAC has done. This was before the war, so I think it's really important to point that out, because all these stories that we've heard, everybody has a story in the Iranian American community about someone who's been horribly impacted by this war. Maybe they've died. Hundreds of civilians have been killed already, or they know someone who has been killed or injured in these attacks and so forth. So what we found, and we had to rush this out there because we got the poll results on Friday, but majority of the Iranian American community opposes war. It believes diplomacy is going to be most successful in resolving the nuclear standoff with Iran, and they support nuclear negotiations, all in a majority. So we expect that that opposition to war and support for negotiations has only increased as a result of this conflict. Also looking broader across, there have been rapid polls that have come out. YouGov is a big one. Of the entire general population, 60% are opposed to the U.S. entering into this war versus 16% saying the U.S. should enter this war and fight Israel's war for it. So, I mean, this is just really staggering numbers against Benjamin Netanyahu expanding this war into Iran and punishing Iranian civilians and potentially dragging the United States into it. So very important to get that across. And Trump voters are also a majority against this. That's something the YouGov poll finds as well. So a betrayal of his base on top of everything else. 2002 Iraq war was the reason I got involved, at the end of the day, with NIAC and getting involved in foreign policy. And we're here at this moment where we have an opportunity to prevent the U.S. from making the very same mistakes. They're doing the exact same thing, the same justifications, dismissing intelligence on nuclear weapons, going in and just causing immense destruction. And, we have a chance to prevent this right now. So I really appreciate everybody joining us on this call who, has taken their time out of their day. And I hope you'll be calling your members of Congress, calling your senators, because there is a chance to prevent this war from worsening and expanding. Trump needs to stop Benjamin Netanyahu from this illegal war that he has started. And there's still time to do it, but we are running out of time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ryan. Really appreciate it. Omar, I want to turn it over to you for our next question. You've worked a lot on advocacy around Palestine and the region. Can you tell us, what do you think that the stakes are at hand right now? How is a potential U.S. war with Iran, going to impact the crisis and genocide in Gaza and the atrocities being committed by the Israeli government there?
Thank you, Yasmine. There's no question. I think this is arguably one of the most dangerous and consequential moments that we have witnessed in a very, very long time. Before I get to your question specifically, I just want to encourage people to just, when you're listening to the propaganda that we are currently listening to day in and day out, throw two countries up on a board, Israel and Iran, and ask yourself a series of questions. Which country of those two has nuclear weapons, and which one is refusing to allow inspectors anywhere near its nuclear sites? The answer is Israel, not Iran. Then you ask, which country has its leaders wanted by the International Criminal Court? And the answer to that question is Israel. And then you ask, which country is expanding its territory by illegally occupying its neighbors? And the answer is Israel. And you ask, which country is currently in the midst of committing genocide, currently literally starving and killing tens of thousands of children? The answer is Israel. And when you ask who initiated this military confrontation, the answer is also Israel. And yet, to hear our politicians talk about this being Israel defending itself is just so ludicrous and so outrageous. It's as if they expect the entire world to have just simply lost their minds to believe something so unbelievably absurd. And the core of it comes, right, if they're not just throwing out that Israel has a right to defend itself crap just in very generic terms, which they've been doing throughout this entire genocide for the past year and a half. They are talking about the alleged nuclear threat. As both Trita and Ryan mentioned, there was a deal on the table that was working. If the goal is to prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons, there was a deal that prevented them from ever even coming close to having nuclear weapons. And yet, Trump and Netanyahu tore that agreement up. If they tore it up, that tells you that they're not actually concerned about the threat of nuclear weapons and nuclear development. They are telling you, like, the lie is just too blatant for anybody who's paying attention. They count so much on the ignorance of people who are watching the situation unfolding to be able to get away with such brazen lies. And I think it's incumbent on us in every interaction, whenever we call our members of Congress for advocacy, whenever we engage with people in the media, everywhere, to not allow any of these lies to stand. This is not about nuclear development, because there was a deal on the table that Iran is still insisting they can go back to, and it's being turned down. So the question is, what is this about? If that's not what's about that, it is about Israeli regional domination. It's about putting the entire region under an order in which Israel gets to decide who has what and who can do what. And all of it, when you look at the governments in the region that are on the hit list for Israel versus the ones that are not, the defining issue is where they stand on the issue of Palestine. Are they willing to push back against Israel's genocide, Israel's occupation in meaningful terms, or are they not? And for every government that is willing to restrict its objections to what Israel is doing to rhetoric, those governments are fine. Israel has no problem with them. And if any government tries to intervene in a more direct way to try to create a cost for Israel's policy of genocide and occupation and expansion, those governments become targets of sanctions, of military action, of everything else. That's the dynamic, and that's what we need to understand. And right now, for the longest time, when you listen to the rhetoric of Israeli political leaders and commentators, there's a lot of emphasis on the idea that Israel did not finish the job of the Nakba. When Israel was founded, it was founded at the expense of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who were driven out from their homes, hundreds of Palestinian towns and villages that were just obliterated to make sure that Palestinians cannot go back. And yet they remain within a significant Palestinian population, both within what is defined as the modern state of Israel and within the occupied territories that Israel is obligated to withdraw from, the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem. And now Israel sees an opportunity to, quote unquote, finish the job. And that's what they're doing. They are trying to obliterate Palestinian existence entirely. And in the process, they see this moment of Iran losing a lot of allies in the region as a moment for them to finish the job of obliterating any opposition in the region to what Israel wants to do. That is what we're witnessing. And the question before us, when you talk about what the stakes are, is the region going to live under Israeli domination moving forward? Yes or no? That question is likely going to be answered in the coming weeks, possibly months at best, but certainly no longer than that. And it's a terrifying moment. And from the United States perspective, the cost, both to people's lives, to the global economy of the US jumping into this conflict, is just utterly insane. So it's a crime that we are living through this genocide. It is an unbelievable atrocity that American policy is. Just today, more than 100 Palestinians were killed waiting for food. They're being deliberately starved. They're being told to go to alleged aid distribution centers to get food. And when they show up, the Israeli military opens fire and kills them. There is not a single day that goes by in which you cannot turn on social media. I wish I could say it's your televisions. Unfortunately, the media does not value Palestinian life in any sense. And so you have to go to your social media to see those images. They are unfolding day in and day out. And any person with a conscience would look at this and understand how horrific it is. And I think the United States, the way American media coverage deals with this issue gives cover for Israel. And in spite of that, there was significant opposition to what Israel was doing in Gaza because the images emerging on social media did change public opinion among young people. And now, with this new escalation with Iran, Israel is taking this opportunity to escalate its genocide. And it's just an absolute horror show. And so we need both things at the same time of saying, if we want a future for peace and justice and equality in the region, it starts with restraining Israel's insane behavior towards Iran. But it certainly has to extend towards ending the genocide in Gaza. That is an absolute emergency. And from there, we can begin looking about what we need to shift in policy. But those two objectives are an absolute emergency. No U.S. war with Iran, restrain Israeli behavior in the region that is completely unhinged, and immediately end the genocidal slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza and allow food to reach the people who are desperate for it.
Thank you so much, Omar. Indeed, it does in fact feel like a horror show. So I want to make sure we have enough time to talk a little bit about the legislative vehicles that have been introduced in the House and Senate to prevent war with Iran. And I'll turn to all of our panelists, starting with like Ryan and Trita and Omar, if you want to weigh in as well. So we know that only Congress has the authority to declare war. Senator Sanders introduced his No War Against Iran Act. Senator Kaine on Monday introduced his Iran War Powers Resolution. And in a matter of hours, yesterday, we were able to get more than 70 organizations representing millions of their members across the country, including Indivisible, Human Rights First, Center for Constitutional Rights, If Not Now movement, so many others, to endorse Representative Kaine's Iran War Powers Resolution to prevent war with Iran. And a bipartisan House resolution was also introduced yesterday that has at least 27 co-sponsors at this moment. It's led by Representative Massey and Representative Khanna. Our organizations are whipping support for these war powers resolutions. And I want to turn to Ryan first to talk a little bit about the importance of the WPRs. Senator Kaine had a similar war powers resolution introduced after General Soleimani was assassinated in 2020. If you can go into details as to why these resolutions are so important and why it's been, mainly the focus for advocates and advocacy organizations, and what it means when we say the privileged nature of it. And someone from our team, I think, will drop a call to action. We're doing joint letters to Congress in support of the War Powers resolution. So I'll turn it over to you first, Ryan.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so all of these bills and legislative efforts are aimed at ensuring that the U.S. does not enter into a war with Iran. So that just very top level, view of these efforts, that is what this is about. So only Congress is allowed to declare war. The Kaine War Powers Resolution is, I think, far and away the most important one. So if you're only able to pitch one piece of legislation, you're talking to your senators, it's the Kaine War Powers Resolution. And the reason for that is it will receive a vote. It is privileged, meaning, Chuck Schumer, John Thune, they can't just be like, oh no, we're not going to have a vote on this, which is like 95% of bills that ever get introduced. They just don't come up for a vote. War powers is important because it is tied to that, constitutional prerogative of Congress on matters of war and peace and so forth. So Senator Kaine did this, in very similar fashion in 2020 when it did look like we were going to war under Trump in 2020. He pulled back from the brink then. I do think the war powers push was a a key tool that we had to make sure that he did stand back from the brink and so forth. So Senator Kaine works very bipartisanly. He tries to get allies on war powers issues like Rand Paul on board. He was able to get even some, more Iran hawks on board last time, like Todd Young. So definitely, even if you've got the most dyed-in-the-wool Republican as your senator, push them on this because they should be standing up for the Constitution and at least be open to having a vote on this. I'll also touch briefly. There's a very good House resolution that's very similar, led by Thomas Massie, a Republican, and Ro Khanna, a Democrat. It's a little bit less likely to come up for a vote. It's a little bit easier for Mike Johnson to torpedo efforts there. But that's another one. A lot of representatives over in the House who should be signing on to that one. And we've already seen a number of strong allies endorse that. The Sanders No War with Iran Act, we like it too. Really, the main difference is it's targeted at appropriations, meaning spending bills and so forth. And it's not privileged, so it isn't necessarily going to come up for a vote. So frankly, everybody should sign all of these and show as much support and opposition against war as possible. So I hope that kind of lays out the timeline. Timeline came War Powers resolution. Perhaps next Thursday or next Friday it can come up for a vote.
Great. Incredibly helpful. Thank you, Ryan. And Trita, I know that Quincy works a lot with Republican offices. I mean, what are you all hearing? The Senator Kaine's office has been like very kind of disciplined on messaging, and the call that we had with their office today, they made it clear that literally the question that they're asking these offices is, do you support war with Iran? That's it. If you don't support it, then you need to be on this resolution. So I was just curious what sort of feedback you guys are getting from conservative offices, or if you think they would be open to jumping on his WPR. You're on mute right now, Trita.
Sorry about that. Many of them, I'm sure, would, but I think it's also be very clear that many of them are more effective in communicating directly with the White House right now and conveying their views rather than necessarily using legislative vehicles. I'll let that aside. But let me just say a couple of things to better explain the situation they're in. Compare this to 2003. 2003, most polls show that 70 to 72% of American public supported invasion of Iraq. Amongst Republicans, it was above 91%. Today, polls show that roughly 23 or so percent of Republicans supporting Israel in a war. It's not even well short of even the US going into that war. And more than 53% oppose. Back in 2003, it took about a year and a half before Republicans started to speak out against the war with Joe Wilson Walter Jones and others started speaking out. Right now, you're having numerous Republicans screaming on top of their lungs even before the war has started. So the starting point for the administration from a political standpoint is devastatingly negative if they actually will go down this route. The question is, to what extent is this making it through to the president? It certainly is making it through to a lot of people in the White House, I can tell you that. But whether it's reaching the president in the manner that it should is not entirely clear. But this creates a very, very different situation from what existed from 2003, which then leads to a different scenario, which is that in case the war begins, let's say we lose the fight about stopping the war, the next battle will be when and how the war ends. And that battle will come much sooner than it did in 2003, precisely because of some of these realities that I just mentioned. And I think we should keep that in mind as well, because people will obviously be tremendously upset if we lose this battle, and rightfully so. But we have to understand that there will be no time for taking a breather, because we have to immediately work towards making sure that that war ends as quickly as possible, and we will have a chance of doing so.
Thank you so much, Trita. Incredibly helpful. I want to be respectful of our panelists' time. So we're going to maybe open it up to some questions. We see a ton in the Q&A. I'm going to ask the first one that I see in here. Uh, One of our attendees is asking, are Arab countries like Qatar, UAE, and even Turkey helping Israel with military support? And how much influence did they have with Trump in getting the US involved? If anyone is interested in taking that.
Happy to comment briefly on that. I don't think they're actively supporting. I think they're terrified of the prospect of this war expanding, the Arab countries in the Gulf in particular. They know that if this war explodes, that they're going to be caught in the crossfire. So they're desperate for de-escalation, and I don't think that they're directly participating. Nonetheless, there's no denying the fact that they host US military bases. And so if the US wages a war on Iran, those bases are going to be part of that fighting because they're hosted there. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. They don't want to alienate the US entirely. They depend on the US. That's a very close alliance. And so they maintain those relationships. And at the same time, they don't want this war. So I would stop short of saying that they are intentionally participating in any way or assisting, but also you can't say that they're entirely uninvolved given the fact that they are hosting these significant US military bases in the region that would absolutely come into play should this war expand. They're in a very, very tough spot and desperate for some kind of de-escalation.
Could I just
Right.
add one thing to what Omar said, which is absolutely correct? As it stands right now, it does not appear that any of them have given the United States permission to use their bases for any such attack. And that creates significant logistical problems for the United States. Not impossible, but this is probably part of the reason why there's been talk about Diego Garcia and other bases, because the regional states are very much against this, and they certainly know that if their own bases are being used, then that invites Iranian attacks. And the key thing for them right now is to make sure that they don't get dragged into this.
Great. Thank you so much, Trita. There's, I think, a couple questions about the war powers resolutions that I'll quickly answer. Someone asked, why is there no text or co-sponsors posted for Senator Kane's war powers resolution? Why is there not yet a bill number for Massey Khanna House resolution? So just wanted to note that these resolutions were literally just introduced in the last two days or so. So it's going to take some time. But the thing I wanted to note about the Kane one and the co-sponsors, so we are pushing for co-sponsors on the House bipartisan bill because it's already bipartisan. We're trying to get as many members to co-sponsor as possible. It's potentially the House bill could get a vote next week, is we're hearing. We're not sure. The Kane resolution, they are going to be pushing for a vote either next Thursday or Friday. And Senator Kane specifically has asked us not to ask Democratic senators to co-sponsor while they're in the process of working to get a co-lead, a Republican co-lead. So I just wanted to also kind of flag that as well. Are there any other questions, Trita, Ryan, Omar, you see in the chat that you'd be interested in answering? I think Ryan, I think you sort of, there's a question in there about Iranians wanting regime change. I think you sort of answered this in your remarks, but if you want to take it, one of the question is, the media here makes it sound like most Iranians want regime change, but how true is that? Are there people in Iran who think regime change at the expense of a war is worth it? Would Khamenei stepping down be enough to help bridge that division so people can put up a united front against foreign intervention?
Yeah, so it's a big country. There's 90 million people in Iran, so you're certainly going to have a few people who would invite war and so forth at any cost and so forth. But I think all indications are it's a very slim minority in the country, and the overwhelming majority of people, including human rights defenders on the ground who have, done jail time for pushing back on Iran's authoritarian government. They're very strongly against this war are horrified about what Israel has been doing and have put out, a number of different statements saying, this is horrible. War is not the way. War is not going to lead to democracy and human rights and so forth. So, I understand there's kind of like a cottage industry, like of, people trying to push regime change by any means and so forth, but that's not what Iranians, by and large, have been saying on the ground.
Thank you so much, Ryan. We can take maybe one or two more questions. One attendee is asking, how likely do you all feel that the US will enter this war, either through strikes, troops, or both?
I mean, I can start off. I think it's very likely. I think it's very possible. I think there's still a chance to avoid this, but since the weekend, we've seen Trump tilting more and more in the direction of military intervention and embracing a lot of Israel's warfare kind of as his own, and including this, absurd truth social post that he had urging an evacuation of Tehran and so forth. So I'm very concerned. If I wasn't concerned, I wouldn't be here. But there is still time to prevent this and prevent us from tilting over fully into the war. And so that's why it's so important that we raise our collective voices now and say no to Trump entering us into this war.
If I can jump in on that, and I'll tie it also to a question that Ali Harb is asking in the chat about Tulsi Gabbard saying that their assessment is that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program and is not developing a nuclear weapon, and Trump referring to that recently and saying, I don't care what she said in the context of being asked, you're saying this is what this concern is about. Those are related in that there is a talking point here, and I think Trita referred to that earlier in his remarks, of it seems like what Trump actually wants is a deal, and what Netanyahu actually wants is an American war on Iran. And what we're witnessing, from my perspective, is a clear attempt by Netanyahu successfully manipulating Trump into a position where Trump is going to find himself backed into a corner where it's going to be very hard for him to find an alternative to waging this war and joining in. If Netanyahu told Trump that all you need to do is play tough, we're going to do this attack, and then you just, saber rattle and get on and threaten that Khamenei might be killed, and so they're going to come rushing to the table to negotiate. Netanyahu knows very well that the Iranian reaction is going to be the exact opposite of that. That if you're going to say a humiliating surrender is your only way out of this, that they would rather go down fighting than to simply surrender. And that's making the confrontation ever more likely. And Trump is now stuck. He's already demanded unconditional surrender, and he's saying he's fed up. There's nothing else to talk about. Once you've said all this, under the false assumption that the Iranian government is going to come rushing, begging for any kind of deal that you want, and then they don't, I think Trump is looking for an out and can't figure it out. I think that's the only reason strikes have not happened yet. And the question is he going to be able to find a dignified way out for himself? Is there going to be a face-saving way for him out after he's already made these completely ridiculous threats on social media about threatening to effectively obliterate the entire capital city and demanding complete surrender? I think, in a weird way, it is the job of everyone to give him a face-saving way out of this. We have an unhinged president. It's ridiculous that we have a dynamic in which we are trying to have this overgrown toddler looking for ways for him to save face and do policy. The relationship is supposed to be that the president allows for citizens to sometimes act out or behave or whatever, and he's supposed to be the wise voice of reason as a ruler. And here we have the opposite dynamic, where we do have someone who's not particularly wise or cautious or careful. And I hope that there is a face-saving way out of this. And that's my worry, is that he's boxed himself in, and that's the only reason why I think a war is more likely than not, is because he's already crossed a certain threshold in his rhetoric, and I'm not sure what backtracking for Donald Trump would look like.
Could I say one thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yasmine? I fear Omar may quite be right, because he's absolutely right in the sense that he needs a face-saving way out, and so do the Iranians. The statements about Khamenei in particular is highly problematic from the Iranian side, because he's not just the head of the state, he is also the Majai Taqlid for the source of emulation for a lot of Shiites outside of Iran. So there's a religious authority there that in some ways it goes beyond that of what they need to protect as the leader of the state. And this makes it very, very difficult for the Iranians to even take steps that they want to take right now, positive steps, because it will be perceived that it is done under duress, given these type of things. So there is going to be a need for a softening of the atmosphere by all sides, particularly those who like to tweet a lot, before something can happen. The question is if there is enough time, because the Israelis are right now putting a tremendous amount of pressure on Trump to take military action against Fordo, knowing very well that once that has happened, the little narrow path back to the negotiating table will either be blown up entirely or be made even more narrow than it is right now. So it's a very sensitive situation, but I think what Omar said earlier on is also very true. Part of the reason why this hasn't happened at this point is precisely because his mood shifts and it is now in a place in which he is trying to find a way out. But the things that have been said and done makes it very difficult for the other side to be able to respond positively to the fact that he's shifting his position or shifting his attitude at least.
Thank you so much, Trita. One last question I just saw, and I think our panel has already answered this. But a question I saw that I lost now was, what do you think the ultimate goal is? Is it regime change or is it a nuclear deal? I think everyone on this panel believes the ultimate goal is not a nuclear deal, right? I think we believe that the intentions are nefarious. It's regime change. But I don't know if anyone else wants to kind of delve into that further or answer any other questions in the chat.
I think Omar probably said earlier that it was a total Israeli military domination of the Middle East, and that seems accurate to me. I don't know if Israel, even Israel and the United States, have necessarily the capability to remove the Iranian government through airstrikes. Perhaps they would be able to, but kind of regardless, I don't think it matters too much to Benjamin Netanyahu. He is out for pure destruction. For making sure that there's not any potential military equivalent in the region to Israel. And therefore, he's engaged in these strikes at a moment that he sees as advantageous to effectively take Iran off the board as a major threat. Now, this tactical short-term success that may have been achieved in the opening days thus far can really get buried really quickly once the snowball starts spinning down the mountain. And, if Iran's nuclear program hasn't been totally taken out, they have a lot of smart people in the country. They can revitalize it deeper underground, and that could make them much more of an equivalent power over the long term. And they wouldn't necessarily have gone that way had it not been for these strikes. There was no indication that Iran under Khamenei was going to pursue weaponization. So, also the missile program, they've been able to fire off a heck of a lot of missiles at Israel and do a significant amount of damage, to Israeli buildings and, perhaps military targets as well. Certainly, we've seen a few dozen Israelis killed in these strikes as well. So, it's very, very damaging and really concerning, just the long-term trends we saw with the Iraq War. U.S. marches into Baghdad, and it looks like a stunning success. And then over time, it becomes just this quagmire where more than 4,000 U.S. soldiers were killed, sectarian warfare. There's just a Pandora's box that is being opened here. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to try to slam it shut again.
Thanks so much, Ryan. I recognize we're at 4:48, and I want to give our panelists time to make any sort of closing remarks or any additional, feedback, insight that you have for our attendees. And thank you again.
I'll just say something real quick in closing I know that watching a genocide for the better part of 2 years can make you feel hopeless that you failed to stop it, but please do not stop calling your members of Congress. I don't know that that will succeed in stopping the genocide or stopping the possibility of the US bombing Iran, but just the fact that it's a chance, that it has the potential to do that, I think is really important, and we can't afford to give up on that in this moment.
Can I add to what Omar said? I totally agree. You have to do it, even if the chance is 1%. You got to take that chance. But also, particularly if the crowd listening here are closer to democratic parties, I think this is also an investment in the future beyond this, which is it is critical that the Democratic Party now restore its standing as a party that stands against war, stands in favor of diplomacy. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, that has not necessarily been the case. And if they fail this test, given the fact that this was a deal that Obama first struck and the Democrats fought hard to get it, if they fail this test, that means that they are turning the Democratic Party to the Democratic Party of Liz Cheney rather than the Democratic Party of Obama. That's the choice right now. So they have to do this, in my view, beyond this immediate issue.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, thank you again to Trita, Ryan, Omar for joining us. Thank you so much to the more than 300 attendees we had on such short notice. Really appreciate everything that you all are doing. I mean, our action on the WPR's, the War Powers Resolution, I think has close to 30,000 letters that have been sent to Congress. So really appreciate that. Sorry, but thank you so much for everything. And yeah, keep fighting.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.